DEI, you're seeing a number of corporations retreating from their DEI policies. In the past few months, Ford, Coors, Lowe's, Boeing, Toyota, Walmart, notably, we mentioned last week, Cat, Craftsman, John Deere, Jack Daniels, Tractor Supply, Harley. A lot of this is because of the activism of Robbie Starbuck online, the ability to post information about corporate DEI policies on sites like X these days. Maybe that would have been censored in a bygone era when it was Jack Dorsey running Twitter instead of Elon Musk running X. But also we have this, the D.C. Press Corps doing its best job it can to try to quell research on this topic. There's a new study on DEI that is worth discussion, conducted by the Network Contagion Research Institute in collaboration with Rutgers University. And from the summary of Colin Wright, who's an evolutionary biologist, the researchers found certain DEI practice could induce hostility, increase authoritarian tendencies, and foster agreement with extreme rhetoric. Gee, who would have thought that? Anybody who's been paying attention, but it's always nice to get the science. With billions of dollars invested annually in these initiatives, that's right, billions, the public has a right to know if such programs might instead, that are heralded to be effective as moral solutions to bigotry and hate, might instead be fueling the very problems they claim to solve, something, of course, we've been talking about ever since. This is the counting by race, and we know where that road leads. But again, always good to have scientific backup. The study in discussion investigated the psychological effects of DEI pedagogy, specifically training programs that draw heavily from the texts of Ibram Kendi's, Hank Rogers, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. The findings, describes Colin Wright, unsettling. Through carefully controlled experiments, the researchers demonstrated that exposure to anti-oppressive, i.e. anti-racist rhetoric, common in many DEI initiatives, consistently amplified perceptions of bias where none existed. Participants were more likely to see prejudice in neutral scenarios and to support punitive actions against imagined offenders. These effects were not marginal. Hostility and punitive tendencies increased by double-digit percentages across multiple measures. Perhaps most troubling, the study revealed a chilling convergence with authoritarian attitudes, suggesting that such training is fostering not empathy, but the opposite, coercion and control. Well, I mentioned this probably a couple times over our many years of discussing this topic. I mean, you go back to the Robert Kleck SCAR experiment at Dartmouth in 1980, I think it was. Remember that experiment? Researchers at Dartmouth and psychologists and so forth, the brain sciences at Dartmouth. They took a group and they said, we're going to, draw a scar on your face that looks very realistic. And we're going to put you in a room with other people and see if you're treated differently, scar versus no scar.
Yeah,
scars versus no scars.
Power of perception over reality.
And so they draw a scar on a person. They show that person they have the scar in a mirror before they're sent into the room with other people. Except what the person who they drew the scar on doesn't know, that after they were shown the scar in the mirror, and they touched up the makeup, they actually removed the scar.
Yep.
So they go into the room and they come back and they say, oh, yes, I was treated so much more shabbily by people with a scar on my face than without the scar. In fact, there was no scar. But it's the same thing here. If you tell people again and again and again you're oppressed and you're a victim, then you start to have a bias towards somebody treating you as an oppressor or victimizing you in some way, even though it's imagined. This is not to say that racism and bigotry doesn't exist, the usual qualifier, but the idea that it's systemic and pervasive, and that DEI is the cure to what marginal bigotry and racism does exist, I think that's very much in doubt, to be generous. For more on the topic and related issues, pleased to be joined again by Zaid Jilani. Zaid is a journalist and communications consultant based in Atlanta. Zaid, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here.
Do you sense that the worm is turning on DEI in corporate America? You know, as we talk about sort of this pro working man, working woman administration that is taken over, that where Trump really enjoyed the support of the non-college educated versus the college educated, and this seems to be a much greater divide than, say, black versus white versus brown.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. This was really the second election, the presidential election in a row, where Trump actually outperformed the Democrats with workers by a more successful margin this time than last time in 2020. But it's a trend that's been building for some time, and I think, as you mentioned, the divide really is now between voters who have college degrees and those who don't. They tend to be sorted in different ways, not only by who chooses to go to college, but also by just the experience of being in college, right? It tends to socialize even having certain views. And I think that, for the Trump administration, they have a couple of challenges. One is holding on to that group of people who they assembled in this election. It's kind of their version of the Obama coalition, right? You have everything from a broad advantage with working class whites to real inroads with Latinos and even some inroads with African Americans, who are kind of the most solid bloc or base for the Democratic Party. Well, at the same time, I think there will be Republicans who still want to expand their votes among college-educated voters, right, in order to expand their coalition and also have more stable and secure, elections in the future, both in the midterm elections and then whoever succeeds Trump, whether that be J.D. Vance. And I think with respect to the issues you were talking about in particular, I mean, I think that the remarkable thing is that the Democrats, as a political party, have been very defensive of a set of, I think, procedures and practices that many workers view as an extension of management, right, or an extension of human resources, right? They feel like they're forced to do these things so that these companies can say, hey, don't sue us. We did this mandatory training. But it's not clear that anyone's really benefiting from it. And it's also something that I think a lot of workers just end up really resenting, which is why one of the more consistent findings you have of these kinds of programs is that they backfire, right? People come out of them even more prejudiced or even more resentful. So, yeah, I do think that this is something that caught the Democrats by surprise. They didn't realize that the Republicans were kind of onto something here, right? They had tapped into a real feeling among a lot of American workers who don't like feeling condescended to in their workplace.
Yeah, I mean, the alternating between patronizing and vilifying turns out to offend many who are being patronized too, as well as being vilified. I mean, it's a shocking result.
Yeah, and I think that there's an opportunity here for there's an opportunity for the Republicans, I think, to double down on kind of going on offense against a lot of these practices. But also there's an opportunity for the Democrats to just kind of say, hey, this is not a winner for us, right? Like the perception their own professional class had given them that these are important practices that benefit minorities, that workers look forward to and are eager to have in their workplace was wrong. I mean, it's only a very small sliver of workers who typically demand these kinds of practices or processes. I mean, typically it's actually companies or organizations that want to put them through as kind of a CYA, measure to prevent lawsuits or just to say that they did it. And I think, another kind of larger thing at work here is interest rates, right? I think a lot of DEI was a low interest rate phenomenon where, like, you would see larger organizations like, Walmart's cutting back now, right? Like, when money was cheap, they would be happy to expend tons of resources on programs like this. I think when the rubber hits the road, though, they have to look at what's actually producing results for them, and this stuff, by and large, is not.
Right. The other thing, it seems to me, in terms of where this goes, because the need to make the case doesn't stop, is I'm not. It's not my posture to just jettison every college-educated American, of course, and I'm sure that's not the Republican parties or the MAGA movements either. But the play is to continue to make these arguments. This study that came out that we were referencing, to continue to make the arguments that these are bad policies. These don't help people, and And from the perspective of some non-college educated, if they're subordinates to a college educated manager or supervisor, just stop doing that. I don't like that. And you're not a good person because you're doing this. In fact, you're creating the problems you're attempting to solve. So you continue to persuade, essentially, to bring some of the maybe well-intended college-educated into the fold to understand the perspective and grow the coalition.
Yeah, and look, I think that one of the more telling moments in the presidential race was when that comedian made a joke at Madison Square Garden rally at Trump's, and I think the Democrats really felt like, oh man, this is it. They gave us the golden goose. Millions of Latinos are now going to swing into our column, and we won't have to worry about the election. The reality is, if you go down to your Waffle House or your barber shop or whatever, and you hear multiracial workers trash talk with each other, give each other ribbings and things, like that's a normal part of life for them, right? I don't think that joke in particular was the funniest joke in the world, and if you watch the video, it kind of fell flat. But at the end of the day, what else do you expect a comedian to do, right? I think that by having this kind of clique of professional class people around them, the Democrats often just forget that one of the essential qualities of being in the working class is that you mix among all kinds of people, right? You're not actually siloing yourself off among people who have a very strict set of manners or certain social norms, where you shouldn't be telling jokes, you should always be treading on eggshells, so on and so forth. And and I think for the Republicans, it's worth leaning into this because it is an effective coalition, as we saw in this presidential election. It is a good coalition for them. And if I were the Democrats, I would think hard and long about their longtime assumptions, particularly about minority groups, right? And they need to realize that a lot of these people are workers first, right? They're not the people who lead your campus affinity group. They're people who, clean toilets for a living, or people who wait on patrons at diners for a living, right? And that's a very different culture, I think, than a lot of their staff and consultants.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about another article you wrote, Are American Muslims Feeling Buyer's Remorse Over Trump? I mean, Trump has pretty much a pro-Israel cabinet. And do you think Muslim voters feel betrayed by Trump, or does this mean they're going to run back to the Democratic Party in 2028?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wait and see because, ultimately I think what will really decide this is the results, right? I think Trump came in arguing, as he always does, he's a boaster. He always argues that he can very quickly wrap up the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. Of course, we know it's not that simple. But, if he does have, through his Trump way, I think the deal-making prowess to make it happen, I think we could still see a sort of resilience in that vote there. And you also have to remember another thing. I think a lot of these people were natural Republicans in many ways, right? Up through the 2000 election, most American Muslims, like 75-80%, voted Republican. And that's typically because there's more overlap on issues like, social cultural issues, or issues like, they tend to prefer lower taxes or making it easier to start a business. I mean, it tends to be a more moderate to socially conservative culture. I do think some of these foreign affairs issues, were very divisive among the Democrats. And, I think if Trump can figure out a way to make his coalition of, it seems like, Christian evangelicals, rich guys he knows, and then some of his extended family, those will be the people negotiating this out. If he can make that work, and I think he continues to retain that kind of socially conservative coalition of workers that he's built, he could perhaps, I think, keep that vote in 2028. But I think this applies to all the minorities that he won this election. Most of them are swing voters, right? They're not super dedicated Republicans at this point, and they're going to look for results. So I think it'll depend a lot on the results.
Zaid Jilani is a journalist and communications consultant based in Atlanta. Zaid, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
$20 million. No, it's not the national debt. It's the buying spree at Fox Valley Coins. And it's on from now until Thanksgiving. It's really the perfect storm. Gold and silver are at historic levels. Fox Valley Coins has a huge order to fill with one of their national clients. And September through Thanksgiving is always when coin dealers stock up for Christmas sales. They are especially looking for the old collector coins like silver dollars, all 1700s through early 1900s coins. All kinds of gold from broken jewelry to gold bars to the old coins, U.S. and foreign. All kinds of silver from sterling silverware to old coins and bars to Franklin Mint items. They can pay cash or check and make house calls on larger deals prior to Thanksgiving. Fox Valley Coins, one light north of I-88 at the Naperville-Warrenville border. They'll make free, no-obligation offers. Make that 20,000,001 reasons to go to Fox Valley Coins now. They give free in-store offers on your items.
You know, the big carriers, AT&T, Verizon,